Hi, this is Jenny Langley, author of the new Maudsley Training Manual. In this video, we're looking at exercise 7.2, which runs through a 5-step model for change, which is really easy to understand, and it can be used for carers or it can be used with the sufferers, but only when they're ready. So let's have a look at it in this instance in terms of the carers. So the 5 steps. The first one is identify any caring behaviours you might want to change. And I always like to use a spider diagram for this, but you could just write them down on a list. Step 2, rank them in order of difficulty to change. And the idea is that it's probably better to go for the easier ones first. But sometimes you have a real need to challenge something really difficult straight away as well. So that's okay too. Step 3, we recommend choosing the easiest one, and then we use a framework called the ABC. So every behaviour has antecedents and consequences. So we'll have a look at an example, and then we come up with a menu of options. So we think about as many different options as we can to start to move gradually away from this caring behaviour that we want to challenge. Maybe a support person can help with this. In the carer support groups, we do this exercise in every series. It's a really valuable exercise to do. And then step 4 is create a behavioural experiment. So you might use SMART planning, solution focused questioning. There's some other techniques you can use as well, but verbalising and visualising, what is this experiment going to be like, and then trying the experiment. And then step 5 is let's review and reflect. How did the experiment go? And then consider the next steps. Now, the important thing is if something works well, we're going to carry on keeping doing it. If something doesn't work out, then we can learn from that. So every mistake is a treasure, as Professor Janet Treasure would always say. Maybe it was too big a goal, maybe we can break it down into smaller steps. So here we have a spider diagram. As an illustration. So these might be the caring responses that you might be thinking about changing. So it might be, first of all, it might be getting back some of your hobbies and your social life and just, getting back some of your quality of life. It might be that you've been falling into the reassurance trap, giving the same reassurance over and over again with your loved one. Is this the right amount of milk? How many calories in this spring onion? Will this make me fat? On and on and on. And you can see here I've got a blue bubble as well as a clear bubble. So the clear bubble is the caring behaviour, and then the blue bubble is what drives us to do these behaviours. So every behaviour has a positive intention. The reason that carers often give that reassurance is in that moment it keeps the peace, especially at meal times when you really want to quieten the eating disorder voice. So on a scale of 0 to 100, that would be really difficult to change. So carers typically say 90, 95, even 100% difficulty to change. Then we have all the issues around the eating disorder creates all this modifying of routines in the family. So it might be meal times, it might be who can watch TV, it might be who's in the bathroom when. In meal times, it might be the positive intention might be, well, if we modify our routines, then it maximises our daughter's chance of eating, and it feels like we're helping. So again, that's going to be really difficult to change, right up there, 95%. Then we've got an example here. Mum always cooks without fat. So she's got into the habit of cooking without fat because obviously the eating disorder voice hates anything to do with fat. And in this, when we were doing this in a workshop, her mum said, I've kind of noticed that my daughter is starting to eat a little bit fat, but I'm still cooking without fat. So maybe that's a little bit lower in terms of difficulty to change. So in this group, the carers said maybe 60%. The reason that she carries on cooking without fat is because she doesn't want to upset her daughter. Then there might be caring responses around mealtime, so in this case having dinner at 9 p.m, and then the social contact, so avoiding public places, avoiding social contact because of the shame, the guilt, the embarrassment. It's just simply too difficult. So a spider diagram could include things like this, or many different other things as well. Okay, so let's carry on to step 2. So rank them in order of difficulty to change. Well, we did this on the spider diagram, but you can also write them down in a list. So you can see straight away the easiest one here is mum cooks without fat, even though that her daughter has started eating some fat. Then we can look at the caring behaviour in terms of the ABC analysis. So what are the triggers? What are the antecedents for mum cooking without fat? Well, she's desperate for her daughter to eat something. It keeps the peace. If her daughter eats something too oily or greasy, it makes her feel sick. Fat's been a no-go zone, not up for discussion, although mum doesn't recognise that her daughter started to eat a little bit of cake or a little bit of chocolate when it suits her. The consequences is the food isn't tasty, it burns the pan, the food is dry, it's unsatisfying, some things don't cook well, the brain can't function well without fat, The eating disorder feels in control. Everyone else feels they're being controlled by the family. There's tension within the family, resentment, no enjoyment of the boring fat-free food. Mum might be cooking different meals for different members of the family, and the family kind of gets split down the middle. So the idea is that we want to make a change. So we want to think, how much discomfort can we and our loved ones tolerate? So we have a menu of options. So the first option is always just carry on. We're going to carry on for the moment because on balance, it's too risky to make a change at the moment. That doesn't mean there won't be change in the future. Maybe talk to my daughter about introducing a tiny bit of fat, maybe a little spray of 1 cal's oil spray, maybe introducing a food that naturally has more fat, like avocado, salmon maybe. Be curious about the fact that the daughter is eating chocolate now. So, really kind of just be curious, not furious, is what we always say. So just exploring that. Maybe a discussion with the daughter about the benefits and necessity of eating fats from the daughter's perspective, not from the carer's perspective. Maybe deciding just to introduce fats in 1 meal a week. You could just sneak in the fat, but then if you're found out, that might kind of abuse the trust that you've built up. Maybe having a conversation with the daughter about her fear of fat, using the communication skills that you've learned earlier in the series. And of course, just carry on regardless, which is going back to number 1, isn't it? So here's an example of a conversation, maybe exploring that fear of fat. So mum might say, let's call her Millie. Millie, help me understand, what are the benefits for you around avoiding fat? Millie, well, it's obvious, mum, it stops me getting fat. Obvious answer. A reflection then, mum repeats the word. So not eating fat stops you from getting fat. So do you think anyone eats fat will get fat? So it's kind of playing devil's advocate. Millie, yes. Then mum could use the ALVS technique where you're looking for the emotion. So attending to the signs. So Millie, you look really tense and twitchy. I notice you get angry and agitated when we talk about this topic. Millie, it makes me effing angry. Back off, mum. And then maybe mum rolls with resistance. So later, when the iron is cold and Millie's wondering where this conversation is going, mum could continue to validate those emotions. So I notice when I bring up the subject of cooking with fat, it makes you angry because you're terrified that if I cook with fat, it will make you fat, and you would feel you're losing control at 100 miles an hour. I do know how difficult it is to even think about eating something cooked in fat. I also do know, Millie, that you want to recover and that you would like your life to be more than your eating disorder. So developing discrepancy there. And then soothe. So there's many different ways of soothing, but maybe, Millie, would you just like a big hug? Maybe not. We love you unconditionally, and we'll always be here for you. You're so incredible and have worked so hard and come so far. You're so determined and courageous, and we're so proud of you for everything you're doing. Okay, so moving on to step 4, we could use SMART planning, solution-focused questioning. So you can see that on the video about 7.1.3. So let's continue the conversation. So maybe mum's saying to Millie, we know change has to come from you and we know how much you've invested in your recovery. So really acknowledging how far Millie's come. And then how would you feel if we try to make a small step forward and we use a teeny bit of oil in 1 meal? Shall we talk about options to do this? Let's take it in turns. And that can be a good way of kind of opening up a discussion because very often the young person will say, well, I just don't know, mum, you tell me, it's too hard. So the change actually that mum's made here is having the conversation with Millie. So she's taken the courage to actually have this quite in-depth conversation around the fear of fat with her daughter. So maybe Millie says, okay, well, if I can put the oil in myself, I would feel safe. And then mum can say, of course, that's a great idea. And then mum could say, well, or I could put the oil in while you watch me. And then mum might say, you, Millie, could measure the oil for me to put in. So there's all sorts of different ways that you could come up with, but it's a good idea to maybe take it in turns. What we don't want to do is be telling Millie, so mum doesn't want to be telling Millie, I think this is what we should do. So either you come up with it together or it's something that Millie comes up with when it's going to affect Millie in this way. Okay, and then step 5 will be review and reflect on how, whichever one they go forward with, review and reflect on how the experiment has gone. If it's gone well, maybe thinking, can we increase oil a bit more? If it hasn't gone so well, maybe it was a step too far, let's go back a step. Okay, so you can see how the process works. And if something doesn't work or it's just simply too hard, the beauty of this model is you can go all the way back to the original spider diagram and maybe think about something else. And of course, for carers, you can always be doing something that doesn't really directly affect your loved ones. So it might be, I'm going to I'm going to meet a friend for coffee for 2 times next week rather than 1, or it might be something like that, just getting a little bit of your life back. But just feeling that you're role modelling that change is possible and you're moving in a direction is really powerful. So thank you for watching. All of these, the worksheets that go with these videos are on my website, so you can go back to those. The 7.2 on the website has got a different example of running through the model, so you might want to look at that as well. Thank you.